What was your favorite part of the pandemic lockdown season?
My favorite part. Wow.
We're silver lining this here. Okay.
Hashtag Enneagram 7s.
Totally.
There are a lot of things that were hard about it. We did buy a house, and that really has nothing to do with the pandemic, but it was great. But I think one thing that's been really nice about the pandemic is that we have a 10-year-old son. And I think he was coming to the age where he was like done with me. Like he wanted to hang out with his friends way more than he wanted to hang out with me, which is developmentally appropriate and like in certain ways kind of nice sometimes because I don't love Minecraft the way that he does. But
do you ever feel like you could die from listening to Minecraft stories? Because sometimes it feels like you could die. It's just like those sound like words. I don't know what those words are.
There was a point in the pandemic where I started understanding the words and it made me sad. Damn it. Now I understand. Anyway, but in spite of the Minecraft fatigue, I do think we kind of got an extra year of being Jack's people because he's an only child, and where I would have been the person who's always ditching, there weren't other options. And like, we got to really be like his best friends in this year. And I think there are a lot of ways that was hard for him and for us, but there are a lot of things about that were really nice. It was kind of, I feel kind of tender about it. We're all excited for him to go into 5th grade in person, please, Jesus. But this year there has been something kind of sweet about just getting to like every day, like, what are we going to do today? And we learned to ride bikes. We've been biking, we've been swimming, we've been learning guitar, so it's like, what can we do with this child that's not on a screen? And it's like, I felt like a camp counselor for the whole year.
Welcome to mom camp.
Yeah, for sure. I think mom camp should be like a camp you go to as a mom where you get like pampered, not where you like are the counselor. He was in kid camp.
True.
And I was in charge of it. What was your favorite part of the pandemic?
Torchies tacos. Now, for those of you who do not live in Austin, Texas.
We're sorry about that. You should. I mean, don't. It's getting real busy over here. Maybe don't come.
But
you could.
But the valiant efforts of the employees at Torchies Tacos carried us through. So I'm deeply, deeply grateful because, like, for me, like, Torchies was kind of like when we first moved here, kind of like the taste of home, along with like Kirby Lane. But with Torchies, like, it was always the taste of like, this is what home tasted like to me when we first moved here. And so like, it was like the comfort, the world was going mad, but there was Torchies. Yeah. And no, they're not sponsoring this episode
yet.
They should. Torchies. Come to you, buddy. Anyway, but yeah, so that was my favorite. There's many other parts, but I think that's the thing that,
They started making like a family pack, and then you could just assemble your own, and it would last for like 3 meals. Yeah, it's really good. Anyway, okay.
Yeah. So
yay, welcome, pandemic life.
Welcome to the Kimberly and Coach Show, where we bring you actionable practices you can use in your leadership and collaboration. I'm Coach. Kimberly is right next to me, and we're back.
We're back.
So, Kimberly, catch up our listeners about what's happening with Kimberly and Coach as a shop during the pandemic.
Yeah, we got a new house and we moved into a brand new headquarters. We have a Zoom studio now, which
Welcome
is
to the studio.
Extraordinarily better than the apartment plan that we had.
You guys, when we would do like an event,
oh my gosh,
we would basically tear our living room apart, set up lights, and like
we
turn
should
our
put a
living
picture in the show notes.
Yeah, turn our living room into a studio, and it was just ludicrous.
Yeah, because most of our events that we had scheduled were in-person events, and at the beginning of the pandemic, it was like, maybe we should just wait. We'll reschedule it in a couple of months. But some of them were like, no, we want a virtual event. And so Ben created a living room studio for us to do webinars. But it meant tearing down the entire living room and moving the couches, and like you couldn't walk anywhere. It was just it was a lot.
It was, yeah.
Now we have a room for this.
Just a permanent studio. Here it is.
It's so
right
exciting.
Here.
So that was a big deal. We shifted a lot of our events into online and virtual format, including doing some Enneagram workshops with some great organizations. And I've been doing some work with an organization called 5Q. So we've got that going. We also learned a new personality like collaboration profile called the Impact. So
That's
we've been sweet. We've been getting certified in that for the whole pandemic. I think we were the slowest people ever because
we took like 6 months to do like a 6-hour training.
But we were also remote schooling a kid and doing other work. And so,
but we really learned the Impact. Let me tell you,
we did. And also we took it slow because we really like it. We didn't just want a piece of paper. We wanted to like wrap our heads completely around it.
Yeah.
I'm actually very excited because our next episode, we are interviewing
Joe Shedden
from the Impact organization. So you guys will get to meet him next time.
Yeah. Yep. Be super cool. And so also we put up a free 9-video introduction course to the work that we do on YouTube. And we actually recorded this course a long time ago for a data science organization. And
which is funny.
Yeah.
We were trying to say like there's data around people too.
Yeah. So it is, it's really super fun. And so we posted the course up on YouTube now, and so it's available to you. I'll put it in the show notes so y'all can go bounce into that and pick up on that if you'd like to hang out with us for 9 videos. They're all short videos, by the way, so they're like less than 10 minutes a piece, but they're power packed.
And it's all around which language of value to choose and why it's important to have a language of value in your organization. So we get into that and then talk about which one might be right for you. So it's actually a very cool little course, and you can learn a little bit about Enneagram, Myers-Briggs, Strengths Finder, which is now Clifton Strengths, a couple other things. So check that out if you want. We'll put the link in the show notes. And then, of course, you may have noticed that we took a little pause on our podcast. It was
for 16 months.
It was meant to be a little pause. Immediately when the pandemic happened, we stopped having any space, literally, because our son was home. My mom came to live with us. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment. Like there's literally not a quiet room to record a podcast, Then we moved and then we were schooling, it's been, we started waiting, like when will be the right time? And we feel like that time is now. It's just a short 1.5 years later.
Yeah.
So we had a podcast. And we started a brand new podcast, the Kimberly Coach Show, which you are listening to right now. And then we put out 2 episodes.
Which are good. Our episode with Abby is great. They're an amazing guest.
They are an amazing guest. Yeah. If you check out episode 2, the practice that Abby talks about is fantastic. We occasionally just get messages about it because people are like, wow.
Yeah. So good.
And then after 2 episodes, we paused for 1.5 years.
We're like, well,
so
is the world coming back online? What are we doing? And we took some time to sort things out, and I think enhance our own offerings too. So we weren't doing nothing.
Just a lot of recalibrating, and then as soon as we recalibrating again because the world kept shifting.
Right.
Are we opening? Are we not opening? Are we doing in-person things? Are we not? So now we're back.
Yep. And we're back.
So, thank you for joining us for episode 3 of the longest season that ever was. And we thought that the practice that would make the most sense to talk about as we jump back into this podcast would be checking in after a setback.
This is a good time in the ethos of the world.
The whole world.
Really the world, because there's been a lot of weird things happening, and a lot of folks are struggling. A lot of folks are quitting. Also, I think is really interesting right now. They're calling, somebody was naming it the Great Resignation, where shops are like, "Hey, okay, everybody come back in the office," and they're like,
"Nah,
no, I'm a quit," and they do. And yeah, it's really been a weird thing.
Yeah, now is a very good time to invest in your team dynamic.
It's a very good time if you like to keep them.
During the Great Resignation, you might want your people to feel valued.
Yeah, and so
just an idea.
So Kimberly has formulated a series of questions to really stop and pause, and ask your team. And sometimes, some teams feel like, oh, that's just, fluffy, BS nonsense, that doesn't put anything to the bottom line. But here's the thing. If you don't have people,
I think we're seeing the bottom line right now. Like, oh, it does matter.
Would you like to run the entire shop by yourself? Because I mean, if you do, cool. As when I worked at Steak and Shake, that was a question that we asked a lot, and when we were especially when we were dealing with challenging employees, do you want to run the restaurant by yourself? Go ahead and fire them. Go ahead, let them go. I think you can run the whole shop yourself.
We've definitely told this story in our other podcast, but Ben would build up a really great crew, and then he'd have a weekend off and come back, and they had fired the whole crew. Yeah, then they didn't want to work for someone that wasn't, or the whole crew had quit, and he'd have to start
it over again. It's just like, come on, guys.
This is like 20 years ago, but it's tendrilled into everything we do today.
Really?
Like, let's not do that. Yeah, and of course, we're all coming back sort of from the pandemic. Of course, it's not over. There's a lot of little setbacks in a setback as big as a global pandemic. But these questions are also useful in a normal business setback, which you have all the time.
No.
The loss of a big client.
No businesses ever have setbacks.
A surprise resignation of an important employee. Or, you roll out a new program and it doesn't work. So there's a bug that is tragic, data loss, things like that. And so when you have a setback, it's very tempting to manage the crisis and then just try to get back to normal as quickly as possible. Like, back to the grind. We lost time, now we have to gain it back without taking a pause and checking in after the setback. And that often makes people feel frustrated and unvalued, and it stops you from learning things that you could really benefit from through the course of that setback. So we have a couple of questions, and we'll talk about them in terms of the pandemic, but also in terms of, every business has setbacks. And these are questions that you can ask. You can take a pause, even if it's just an hour meeting with your key people, to say, I just want to take a minute and check in so that we can recalibrate and make sure we're all on the same page, make sure we've learned what we need to learn, that kind of thing. So the first question is, in this setback, did you feel supported? And that's going to give people a chance to tell you how they felt, if they felt valued and supported. It's also going to help you see the holes in your processes for supporting people as they manage crisis, because you can't run a business or a team without sometimes having a crisis. And so
sometimes
you want your team to feel like everyone's on the same team and everybody's being supported. You don't want it to be the blame game of like, whose fault is this crisis? That is a question that is costing you time.
Game. That's you just lost the game as soon as that question comes out on the table. It's like,
I mean, you can learn from it, but it's not going to help you in that moment. The moment of solving it, you need people to feel supported.
Right. And I think so many shops, they don't feel like, well, feelings are not important because that doesn't have anything to do with the function of the job or the function of the work. And that also is a losing proposition if that's a position that's held, because people are not just robots. Right. People are not, they're not automatons. They have hearts and minds. We said, in previous programs that people are hearts and minds to be motivated and coached, and not
robots to be managed.
Right. Robots to be programmed.
Right.
I mean, that's just, I having been in the tech world for 20 plus years, I know the difference, and let me tell you, pull any tech person aside and they will tell you the difference too.
Right.
And so many times we forget that side of the business, because that is a side of the business. There are real people, real hearts, real minds in this process.
Mm-hmm. And there's a ton of research and data around people's sense of feeling valued and heard, and the way they do their work, and the way that employee engagement affects the bottom line and the productivity. And when you are in a crisis and you feel like nobody really cares about you, the way that you're going to show up to work is very different than when you feel like we are all part of a team and we need to manage this together and I am supported. And you know this because you've probably worked a job that sucked. And you've probably worked a job that was okay. And you know the difference of how you show up when you are invested. And so when you ask a question like, did you feel supported, and you learn from their answer, then just the question itself shows that you want to support them, even when you're in a crisis, even when the crisis is their fault, because that, that happens. And if you're not firing that person, you have to develop that person. You have to fix it. You have to help them, and they have to know they still are valuable. Then they're going to do their best work, because when you feel ownership of a place, you're going to work hard to save it and to make sure things come out as well as they can. When you don't feel ownership because everybody doesn't care about you, you are going to punch your card and you're going to do the bare minimum to not get fired. But you're not going to show up with your best effort. And in the middle of a setback, you want the best effort,
Right. So the next question to hit is, have our goals and priorities changed? Mm-hmm. Do we need to recalibrate the mission or the task we're on before we restart again on this process? I think the goals and priorities, I think for a lot of shops, have shifted a ton in these last 16 months, especially because not only did they have to reprioritize their internal process, they had to reprioritize how they were serving customers, because it was just not, it was not business as usual. And so that shifted, because part of the goals and priorities in this last 16 months is, how do we keep our customers from not dying, and how do we keep them, from getting sick, how do we keep our people from getting, our own employees and our own customers our own internal customers from dying and getting sick, because that's not going to help you either.
It's definitely not going to help.
When you have an employee, a business full of dead employees, this is not good practice. And I think we're still having shops who are still not quite getting that idea yet. And it's frustrating to me, let me get on my little high horse about this for a second.
Get right back off.
Okay.
Come on back, babe.
Come on back. All right. Come on back. Anyway.
But I think that's a good question in terms of, I think about the restaurant industry. Mm-hmm. So much has changed in the last 16 months about one, how you clean to help people not get illness. And my strong hope is that some of that will stay, we will continue to have better filtration and better sanitation and things like that. And I think another thing that has come up is, when an employee is sick, should they come to work? And I think before this pandemic, the feeling was, if you're not in a hospital, you better be here, in a lot of shops. But now there's like, we know everyone can work, not everyone, many people can work from home now. What if you're sick? You're not so sick that you can't work, but you just don't come in. Then you don't get everybody else sick. What if we could keep that instead of just going back to the way that it was? I think also in the restaurant industry, a lot has happened around the wage of restaurant employees. We called these people essential for over a year. And now they're saying we want to get paid an essential living wage.
Then pay us like we're essential.
And so businesses are having to recalibrate. When you're asking the question, are goals and priorities, have they changed? Then at least in Austin, what I'm noticing is that businesses are shifting the way they're doing business so that they can pay a higher wage in the restaurant industry, because they can't staff their restaurants. And that is happening all over the United States right now.
Oh, yeah.
So, and part of it is that you had to let go of a lot of your staff, and they went and got other jobs, there are other things at play. But if you want to them to come back, what if you raise your prices a little so that you could pay a little bit more, and then maybe those people value the company and the restaurant more. Maybe they treat the customer better. Like there's a shift in the calibration and the caliber of restaurants in Austin that I'm really enjoying. And as a customer, the way I choose a restaurant has changed a lot, because there are restaurants that I do not want to go away.
Right,
so like
right.
part of my life mission right now is to pick the restaurants who treat their employees well, who have amazing atmosphere, whose management we love, and go there and pay more and tip more, because I want them to continue to exist. And some of our favorite places didn't make it out of the pandemic.
They didn't.
And some of them haven't yet, but they might not, So those are just some examples of where, like, if you stop and say, there's been some changes, some things have come up, and maybe our goals and priorities have changed. Maybe our goal was to have the cheapest product, but now our goal is to pay our people and to be the best work environment. That's going to shift the way you do business. Right. And so being able to talk about that is really important before you get back to work. Because if you do need to change the mission, you should do it before you do some work that's not going to get used. You should do it before people are just spinning their wheels trying to get back to normal.
Yeah. Yeah. So the last question that Kimberly formulated is, has a setback taught us anything we can implement moving forward? So this is, in addition to the goals, priorities, and the mission, we also need to look at the things that we can implement in terms of task and process.
Right.
And that, I think, is wide-reaching, widespread, in the way that so many shops have done remote work. Schools too.
Yeah.
A lot of schools, almost every school system that did remote, which I think is almost all of them, really struggled with this.
It's so hard.
It's so hard. Yeah. When you got a whole bunch of, when you got 30 some odd little pictures of small little people on your screen, and you're used to having them inside of a big room, like that process is teaching remote is wildly different. Now, I've taught remote I've been teaching remote since like 2007. Okay. Which is weird. Maybe even before that. So way back. And so for me, it's second nature. I'm like, okay, listen, I've been doing this for a long time, blah, blah, blah. Well, of course, I know how to do it because I've been doing it for, 15 plus years. But for a school teacher who's never had to do that kind of work and never sat a Zoom meeting before, it was a culture shock. And for the kids, it was a culture shock. Yeah.
I think it's also, there are some key differences. Like, you are teaching adults who are choosing to be in your courses.
Or at least
versus
maybe
like
choosing
children. Well, as an adult, you get to pick whether you quit your job.
Or go to a course with me.
You don't get to pick whether you go to school. Your parents pick. The state picks.
Right.
But I think just when I think about teachers, I think of how much, Jack was in 4th grade. When a kid is sad in your classroom as a teacher for a hot second, and you feel them, you're aware of them because of their posture. You're aware of them because they're looking down. They might cry or something. When a kid is sad on Zoom, they turn off their screen. They turn off their video. Like, just the hard question about, do you make a kid turn on their video or not?
Right.
But you have no information about what that kid is doing if they don't have their video on. It's just profoundly hard.
Yeah, for sure. So let's bring this in for a landing here. When we're doing these kinds of check-ins, are there any considerations that,
okay.
Yes.
Before we bring it in for a landing, what was the thing that you were talking about that the setback taught us?
What?
So the question is, has this setback taught us anything that we can implement moving forward? So you were talking about the teachers had to make this change to Zoom.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So like what were you building to in terms of what the setback taught in terms of virtual environments and things like that?
Yeah. So one of the interesting things I think that did happen, because we saw this happen literally real time.
Yeah.
Is we saw the teacher, when you're forced to do something, you have to find ways to cope, right? And you also find best practices. And so that part, I think, as I did watch and observe, Jack's school teacher over the year, she did start to develop best practices. In the beginning, it was real rough, but as the year continued forward, she found ways to keep those kids engaged. She found ways, to communicate with those kids. They did breakout rooms. They did more virtual specific kinds of activities, and so I think the kind of crucible that they were placed into did create a new set of skills that teachers developed on the fly. Now, they may not realize they have developed them. And talking with some teachers, let me tell you, I don't think that they realized how much they did get, and how much it could shift. I mean, now most teachers are going to be like, no, we're going straight back into the classroom next year, which is totally fine. I get that. I endorse that as a life choice. But I think that these new skills that not only just the teachers receive, but also the kids.
Yep.
All right. The kids also developed a new set of skills that no generation has had this young before.
It's a little scary.
And including our own kid, who, as it turns out, he's he's his father's child. Okay. So he's kind of a hacker punk. And so he figured out how to take a picture of Baby Yoda and put it on the camera, and that was, so he was like Baby Yoda for like 2 weeks. And then after that, he and his friend figured out how to put pictures of bagels, and they became the cult of the bagel for a couple of weeks.
Yeah. It got a little obnoxious towards the end.
It did.
In fairness to I think it's making the teacher sound bad, but by the end of the school year, most of the kids were in the classroom, and 4 or 5 kids were in remote. And one of them was Jack, because my mom lives with us and she has health concerns, and, we didn't send him to school. And so because of that, I mean, can you even imagine trying to manage 20 kids in a classroom plus a whole Zoom environment? I don't know. Just in fairness to her.
Yeah. No. And I think partially, what I came to realize later on is okay, maybe the teacher caught on, but maybe the teacher knew about it and was just like, you know what? Do I need to do anything with this right now?
This cannot be my priority.
No.
Yeah. Well,
they can be bagels for another week. It's fine.
It brought them a lot of joy to be bagels.
It did. It's all right, cool.
I think to bring this back out of the school environment just a little bit, one of the things that setbacks often teach us is where there's a hole in our process, where we need to create a checklist, or we need better communication in this part of the process. And so if we don't take a look at that and say what broke down here that led to this, and then implement something that shifts that, then we're missing a huge opportunity to stop it from happening again. Some people really like crisis mode. I don't. So I want to stop and take a minute and say, what did we learn? Not in a blaming way, because that ship has sailed, but is there a way we could have made this not happen? Is there a check and balance that needs to happen here? Is there, a process that needs to be implemented? Do we need to make sure this person's CC'd when we make a decision to shift? Whatever the case is, if you can kind of name that and put it into the process, kind of codify the thing that you've learned, that is going to be a huge win for your culture. And it's going to say, hey, even when we have a setback, we can learn from it and we can get better as a team. And that is going to be much, much better.
Oh, yeah. I think that's one of the interesting things about this is that, the whole entirety of this, there's an opportunity to either whine, cry, complain, and blame. But the other side of this opportunity is to say, this did potentially make us better. We did find out that a whole lot of jobs can be done remote, and that can reduce costs. Right. This can also lead to happier employees. Now, granted, there are some jobs that can't be done remote. So we did learn a lot of things, about what happened. I think if we can move in the direction of a positive in this, out of this pandemic season, I think every shop can benefit. from just taking
Right.
an hour, and saying, what did we learn? Write it down, codify some things, adjust some processes, and move forward in a way that says, in a celebration of what you accomplished. Because that's the other thing too, is that for shops that made it through, there's a lot to be celebrated there. For shops that didn't make it through, there's a time to mourn. We need to grieve. Like when some of our favorite restaurants, decided to close shop, we had a period of grief. Like,
Can you tell we're kind of foodies over here? But we knew the people, and it was like, no.
Right. And so, we need to grieve what has passed, but celebrate what also is coming forward.
Yeah.
And that's what I think I kind of land in terms of the whole kit of that the pandemic has brought, because it really has. It's brought us this whole new set of circumstances, conditions that you can either work inside of and take advantage of, or let it consume the shop, the business, and yourself. And so there's a selection that can be made there.
Yeah. And as we wrap this up, I just want to point out that if you don't take the time to have this conversation officially, it does not mean it won't happen. It just won't happen with you. So you lose out on all of the knowledge. You lose out on the chance to codify things into your processes. But you don't get to listen, and people being listened to is a lot of how people feel valued.
Yeah.
So if you want your people to feel loyalty and ownership and engagement in your shop, whatever that may be, or your team, or even in your family, then listening to how they feel about things and what they noticed and what they'd like to see change and what they'd like to see move forward, that is an expression of value. That is a practice of value.
Yeah.
Regardless of whatever it is they say, And so it's an opportunity that if you don't take it, you're missing out, and they will still process it, but they might not process it in as positive ways as they might if you facilitate that processing.
There'll be many meetings after the meeting. And that's something that you want to capture and maybe even turn into some momentum.
Yep.
So
great.
Thank you for hanging out with us today. Again, this is the Kimberly Coach Show, where once again, we completely endorse visiting your favorite restaurants, paying what they're now charging, and tipping heavily for your favorite people. Thanks.
And be nice.
We'll talk to you next time.
Talk to you next time.